I'm Eleanor, 68 years old, and I never imagined my beloved niece Katie would break my heart at her own wedding. After contributing $35,000 for her dream venue, I arrived beaming with pride, only to discover my table hidden behind a massive column, completely blocked from viewing the celebration. The crushing realization that this placement was intentional left me speechless. What happened next surprised even me. Before I continue this painful story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Please hit that like button and subscribe if family drama resonates with you. Now let me take you back to the beginning. Katie came into my life on a rainy April morning in 1992. I still remember holding her tiny body in the hospital, her fingers wrapping around mine as if making a silent promise we'd always be connected. My sister Diana beamed with pride despite her exhaustion, her husband James snapping photos that would later become treasured memories. I never had children of my own. My husband Franklin and I tried for years, but it wasn't meant to be. When Franklin passed away from heart failure 12 years ago, Katie became even more important in my life. But long before that, Katie and I shared a special bond. Everything changed when Diana was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer when Katie was only 9. The disease took her quickly, barely giving us time to process what was happening. James, overwhelmed with grief and suddenly a single father, struggled to maintain normalcy for Katie. That's when I stepped in, not to replace Diana. No one could. But to provide the maternal guidance Katie desperately needed. "Aunt Eleanor, will you come to my school play?" Katie would ask, her voice small but hopeful. I never missed a single performance, recital, or game. When James had to work late, I was there helping with homework or cooking dinner. The three of us created a new family dynamic that worked. Despite the gaping hole Diana's absence left. As Katie grew into a teenager, I became her confidant. She told me about her first crush, her fights with friends, her dreams of becoming an architect. When college application time came, I stayed up with her reviewing essays and helping her research scholarships. And when she got accepted to Cornell with a partial scholarship, I didn't hesitate to cover the remaining tuition. "I can't accept this, Aunt Eleanor," Katie had protested, looking at the check I'd handed her. "Your mother would have wanted this," I'd replied. "And so do I. This is an investment in your future." Over the years, I'd set aside a considerable sum for Katie. Not having children of my own meant I could be generous with my niece. I helped with her apartment deposit after college, contributed to her first car, and celebrated every promotion in her architectural firm. When Katie called me 2 years ago, practically screaming with excitement about her engagement to Marcus, I felt Diana's absence acutely. My sister should have been here for this milestone. But I pushed aside my sadness and focused on Katie's joy. "He's perfect, Aunt Eleanor," she gushed over the phone. "You're going to love him." I'd met Marcus several times before the engagement. He came from a wealthy family. His father owned a successful investment firm, and his mother was involved in various high society charity events. Marcus himself worked in commercial real estate development. He was handsome, well-educated, and could be charming when he wanted to be. But something about him had always struck me as slightly off. The way his smile never quite reached his eyes. How he subtly corrected Katie in conversation. Still, Katie was glowing with happiness, and who was I to rain on her parade based on mere intuition? When they began discussing wedding venues, Katie mentioned a historic estate that had been featured in several bridal magazines. "It's absolutely gorgeous," she told me over lunch one day, showing me photos on her phone. "But it's way out of our budget. We'll find something else." The disappointment in her voice was evident. Later that evening, I called the venue and inquired about pricing. The $35,000 price tag for a Saturday in June made me wince, but I had been saving for Katie's future for years. What better way to use that money than to give her the wedding of her dreams? When I offered to pay for the venue as my wedding gift, Katie burst into tears and hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "You've always been there for me," she whispered. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Those early planning days were filled with excitement. I met Marcus's parents, Patricia and George Mitchell, at an engagement dinner. They were polite but reserved, clearly assessing me and finding me lacking in some way I couldn't quite determine. Still, I made efforts to connect with them, sharing stories about Katie growing up and expressing my happiness about our families joining together. As the months passed, I began noticing subtle changes in Katie. Her phone calls became less frequent. When we did talk, she seemed rushed and distracted. I attributed it to wedding stress and her demanding job. But then I started noticing other things. How she'd check with Marcus before making any decisions, how her fashion choices shifted to match his preferences, how she'd become quieter in group settings. Still, I pushed my concerns aside. This was Katie's time to shine, and I was determined to help make her wedding day perfect, regardless of any reservations I might have about her fiancé or his family. The first real indication that something was amiss came 3 months into the wedding planning. Katie had initially asked for my input on everything from floral arrangements to menu selections. I'd accompanied her to tastings and helped her research photographers. But gradually my opinion seemed to carry less weight. Actually, Marcus's mother suggested this instead. Became a common refrain followed by, "She has connections in the industry and knows what's best." One Tuesday evening, Katie called to cancel our long-standing dinner plans, the third cancellation in a month. "I'm really sorry, Aunt Eleanor, but Patricia wants to look at bridesmaid dresses tonight, and this was the only time she could make it. I thought we were going to look at dresses together this weekend," I said, trying to mask my disappointment. "I know, but Patricia found this exclusive boutique that's only open for private appointments during the week." Katie's voice had an apologetic edge, but I could tell her mind was made up. As the weeks progressed, I noticed Katie adopting Patricia's mannerisms and preferences. Her normally relaxed style became more formal. Her warm laugh was replaced by a restrained, polite chuckle I didn't recognize. Even her apartment, once filled with colorful artwork and mismatched furniture that showcased her creative personality, underwent a transformation to a more sophisticated aesthetic that Patricia had deemed appropriate. "Don't you think these changes are a bit drastic?" I asked gently one day after Katie had replaced her beloved vintage couch with a sterile white one that seemed at odds with her vibrant personality. "I'm growing up, Aunt Eleanor," she'd replied with a slight edge to her voice. "My tastes are evolving." The real turning point came when I discovered, through a mutual friend, that there had been a planning dinner at the Mitchell's Country Club, a dinner to which I hadn't been invited. When I casually mentioned it to Katie, her face flushed with guilt. "It was last minute," she stammered, "and I knew you had that book club meeting." But I hadn't mentioned any book club meeting to her. The excuse was fabricated, and we both knew it. Later that week, I learned that several major decisions had been made at that dinner. The selection of the band, the officiating minister, even the final menu choices. All without my input or knowledge. After days of internal debate, I finally decided to address the situation directly. I invited Katie for coffee at the little cafe we'd frequented since her high school days. "Katie," I began carefully after we'd settled with our drinks, "I feel like I'm being pushed out of the wedding planning. Did I do something wrong?" Katie's eyes immediately welled with tears. "No, of course not. It's just, Marcus's parents have very specific ideas about how everything should be, and Marcus agrees with them, and I'm trying to keep everyone happy." "Everyone except yourself, it seems," I observed. "And what about your father? Has he been included in these decisions?" James had remarried years ago and moved to Arizona with his new wife. While he planned to attend the wedding, he'd been mostly absent from the planning process, partly due to distance and partly due to his general discomfort with such events. "Dad doesn't care about these details," Katie said dismissively. "He just wants to show up and walk me down the aisle." "And what about what you want, Katie?" I pressed. "This is your wedding." Her lower lip trembled. "I want everyone to get along. I want a beautiful day that everyone will remember. And I want you there with me, Aunt Eleanor. I'm sorry if you felt excluded." Her sincerity seemed genuine, and I felt my frustration melting away. She was caught between two families, trying to navigate complicated relationships while planning the biggest event of her life. I decided to be more understanding. "I'm here for whatever you need," I assured her, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "But please don't shut me out." "I won't," she promised, wiping away a tear. "In fact, there's something important I want to discuss with you." The seating arrangement for the reception. I perked up, Pleased to be consulted on something so significant. I'd like to be seated where I can see you during the reception, I told her. Not at the head table, obviously, but somewhere with a good view of all the important moments. Of course, Katie nodded enthusiastically. I'll make sure of it. You're one of the most important people in my life. Her words reassured me, and for a brief period things seemed to improve. Katie made more effort to include me, calling more regularly and asking for my opinion on smaller details like the wedding favors and ceremony readings. With renewed optimism, I threw myself into finding the perfect outfit for the wedding. After visiting numerous boutiques, I finally found an elegant silk dress in a soft blue shade that Katie had once mentioned brought out the color of my eyes. I splurged on matching shoes and a small, tasteful fascinator that added just the right touch of formality without being ostentatious. For Katie's wedding gift, I commissioned a local artist to create a watercolor painting of Diana's favorite garden, where Katie had played as a child. I included a heartfelt letter expressing how proud Diana would have been of the woman Katie had become. It was personal, meaningful, and something I knew would touch Katie's heart in a way that no kitchen appliance or crystal vase could. As the wedding date approached, I felt our relationship stabilizing. The tension wasn't completely gone, but I attributed the remaining awkwardness to pre-wedding stress and tried not to take it personally. The rehearsal dinner was held at the Grand Bristol Hotel, an establishment so exclusive that the doorman seemed to assess my worthiness before allowing me entry. Patricia and George had insisted on hosting this event, making it clear that they wanted to impress their social circle with their generosity and taste. The private dining room was decorated with elaborate floral arrangements and crystal chandeliers that cast a golden glow over the 60 or so guests. Most were friends and colleagues of the Mitchells, people I'd never met who greeted each other with air kisses and inside jokes about country club events and charity galas. I wore a simple but elegant green dress that had received Katie's approval weeks earlier. Yet as I entered, I caught Patricia giving me a once-over, her lips pursing slightly before she turned away to greet someone more important. That slight but unmistakable look of disapproval set the tone for the evening. I was seated at a table far from the main action, with distant relatives of Marcus who seemed as out of place as I felt. Throughout dinner I tried to engage in conversation, sharing stories about Katie that were met with polite but disinterested smiles. During a trip to the ladies' room, I inadvertently overheard Patricia speaking to one of her friends near the sinks. Eleanor's contribution was generous, I suppose, she was saying in a hushed but audible tone, but she doesn't quite understand our world. Katie needs to distance herself if she wants to truly fit in with Marcus's circle. The aunt raised her, didn't she? The friend asked. Yes, and you can tell, Patricia replied with a small laugh. All those quaint middle-class values. We're working on refining Katie's tastes and connections. She has potential. I froze, my hand on the door of the stall, unsure whether to confront Patricia or pretend I hadn't heard. Before I could decide, they left, their heels clicking against the marble floor. I remained in the bathroom longer than necessary, splashing cold water on my face and trying to compose myself. When I returned to the dining room, speeches were about to begin. Marcus's father stood first, delivering a polished address about legacy and the joining of two families that somehow managed to focus primarily on his son's accomplishments and the Mitchell family's social standing. When it was my turn to speak, I approached the microphone with a trembling hand, but a determined heart. I had prepared a 5-minute speech about Katie, full of heartwarming anecdotes and genuine emotion. But after just 2 minutes, George Mitchell cleared his throat loudly and made a circular motion with his finger, the universal signal to wrap it up. And so, I concluded prematurely, my carefully crafted ending abandoned. I wish Katie and Marcus all the happiness in the world. Thank you. The applause was tepid as I returned to my seat, cheeks burning with embarrassment. Katie caught my eye from the main table and mouthed sorry with a weak smile. But she didn't come to speak with me afterward, too busy circulating among the Mitchells' important guests. Later in the evening I approached Sophia, the wedding planner who had been hired by Patricia despite my offer to cover this expense. I was wondering about tomorrow's schedule, I began. What time should I arrive at the venue to help Katie get ready? Sophia glanced up from her tablet with barely concealed impatience. Oh, the bridal party has a very tight schedule. Mrs. Mitchell has arranged professional hair and makeup artists, and they'll need the space to work efficiently. But I'm family, I protested. Surely there's room for me? The bridal suite is quite limited in space, she replied coolly. But you could join the general guests at 3:30 for the ceremony. I noticed my name had been misspelled as Eleanor on her checklist. When I pointed this out, she made the correction with a dismissive, "Of course, my apologies." That suggested the error was somehow my fault for having an unusual name. As the evening wound down, I found myself alone at my table, watching Katie and Marcus mingling with guests. They looked like something from a magazine spread. Katie in her designer dress, Marcus in his tailored suit, both of them picture-perfect as they navigated the room with practiced grace. Marcus caught me watching them and steered Katie in my direction. His arm was wrapped possessively around her waist as they approached. "Enjoying yourself, Eleanor?" he asked with that smile that never reached his eyes. "It's a lovely evening," I replied diplomatically. "We wanted to thank you again for your contribution," Marcus continued. "The venue will be perfect for our photos. My mother's connections got us featured in Modern Bride. Did Katie tell you?" Before I could respond, he added with a chuckle, "The bank of Aunt Eleanor comes through again, right, babe?" He squeezed Katie's waist, and she gave a laugh that sounded hollow to my ears. "Marcus," she chided weakly, but there was no real reproach in her tone. "Just joking," he said, though it was clear he wasn't. "But seriously, we appreciate it. Don't we, Katie?" "Of course we do," Katie said, finally meeting my eyes. For a brief moment, I saw a flicker of the niece I knew and loved. But then Marcus whispered something in her ear, and she was pulled away to meet yet another of his parents' important connections. As I drove home that night, I tried to rationalize everything I'd experienced. Wedding planning was stressful. Class differences were uncomfortable. Patricia was probably just insecure. Katie was caught in the middle. I was still making excuses when my phone rang the next morning. It was Katie, asking if I could contribute an additional $3,000 for a last-minute upgrade to the floral arrangements. Patricia found these imported peonies that would be perfect for the centerpieces, she explained. But the florist needs an answer today. Despite my misgivings, I agreed. This was Katie's big day, and I wanted it to be perfect. Even if perfect seemed increasingly defined by Patricia Mitchell's standards rather than Katie's or mine. The morning of Katie's wedding dawned clear and bright, as if the universe itself approved of the union. I awoke early, too excited to sleep, and spent extra time on my appearance. My blue silk dress hung pressed and ready. The sapphire earrings that had been my mother's, something blue and something old that I hoped Katie might want to borrow, were nestled in a velvet box alongside my wedding card. I arrived at the venue at 1 p.m., 2.5 hours before the ceremony was set to begin. The historic estate looked even more magnificent than in the photographs, with its manicured gardens and stately architecture. The $35,000 I'd contributed seemed almost reasonable given the grandeur of the setting. "I'm Eleanor Campbell, the bride's aunt," I introduced myself to the staff member at the entrance. "I'm hoping to see Katie before the ceremony." The young man checked his list. "The bridal party is in the East Wing preparing. I can show you to the main hall where guests will be gathering later." "I'd prefer to see my niece," I insisted gently. "I've been like a mother to her since she was 9. After some hesitation, he escorted me to the bridal suite. Through the partially open door, I could see Katie surrounded by her bridesmaids, all friends I recognized, along with Patricia Mitchell, who was directing a photographer. Everyone was in matching silk robes, champagne glasses in hand, creating the perfect Instagram moment. I knocked softly. The laughter inside immediately died down. "Eleanor." Patricia greeted me with a tight smile. "We weren't expecting you until the ceremony." Katie turned, her hair half done. Her expression momentarily conflicted before she composed herself. "Aunt Eleanor, you're early. I thought I might help you get ready," I said, holding up the small velvet box. "And I brought Grandma's earrings if you'd like to wear them." Patricia intercepted the box before Katie could respond. "Oh, how sweet. But we've already selected all the accessories to complement the dress. The stylist has a very specific vision." She handed the box to one of the bridesmaids. "Why don't you put this with Katie's things for later? Is there anything I can do to help?" I asked, still hovering in the doorway, increasingly aware that I was an uninvited presence in this carefully orchestrated scene. Actually, we're running on a tight schedule, Patricia replied. The photographer only has us for another hour. Perhaps you could check that the guest book table is set up properly. It was a dismissal, plain and simple. Katie gave me an apologetic glance but said nothing to contradict her future mother-in-law. Of course, I said, swallowing my hurt. I'll see you before the ceremony, Katie. But I didn't. By the time I returned, the bridal suite was empty, the wedding party having moved to the garden for pre-ceremony photos, another event to which I hadn't been invited. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Katie looked radiant walking down the aisle on her father's arm. James had flown in from Arizona 2 days before and seemed as out of place as I felt, though he performed his role with dignity. I watched from my seat in the third row, tears streaming down my face, remembering Diana and wishing she could see her daughter on this important day. As the minister pronounced them husband and wife, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Joy for Katie's happiness, sadness at the distance that had grown between us, and a nagging sense that something fundamental had shifted in our relationship. During the cocktail hour, I mingled with the few guests I knew, mostly old family friends and some of Katie's childhood companions who remembered me fondly. I noticed James standing awkwardly alone and joined him. Beautiful ceremony, he commented, sipping his whiskey. Yes, I agreed. Katie looks so happy. James studied me for a moment. You okay, Eleanor? You seem tense. Just emotional, I deflected. Days like this make Diana's absence feel especially acute. He nodded in understanding. She'd be proud of the role you've played in Katie's life. I don't think I ever properly thanked you for stepping up when I was falling apart. His sincere gratitude warmed my heart, a bright spot in an increasingly uncomfortable day. When it was time to move into the reception hall, I followed the crowd, pausing to admire the transformation of the space. The tables were impeccably decorated with the imported peonies Katie had mentioned, the lighting soft and romantic, the overall effect undeniably stunning. A young staff member was helping guests find their assigned tables. When I gave my name, he consulted his chart and then pointed. Table 19, ma'am. That way. I followed his direction, weaving through tables 1 through 18, noticing how they formed concentric circles around the dance floor and head table. Table 19, it seemed, was quite a distance from the center of action. As I approached, my steps slowed. Table 19 was positioned directly behind a massive stone column that formed part of the hall's historic architecture. The column, at least 3 feet in diameter, completely blocked any view of the dance floor, the head table, and essentially all the evening's focal points. I stood there, stunned, as the reality of my placement sank in. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't poor planning. This was deliberate. Gathering my composure, I approached Sophia, the wedding planner, who was directing other guests to their seats. Excuse me, I said, keeping my voice steady. There seems to be a problem with my table assignment. I'm completely behind a column and won't be able to see anything. Sophia glanced at her seating chart. Table 19 is correct for Eleanor Campbell. But I can't see the head table or dance floor from there, I explained. Surely there's been some mistake. I'm the bride's aunt. I helped raise her after her mother died. Sophia's expression remained professionally neutral, but her words cut deep. That's where Katie wanted you. All seating was approved by the bride and groom. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't Patricia's doing. This wasn't the wedding planner's oversight. This was Katie's decision. My Katie, who I'd raised, loved, supported, and given $38,000 to for this very event, had deliberately placed me where I would be hidden from view, unable to participate in any meaningful way in the celebration. I looked around the beautifully decorated hall, at the hundreds of guests finding their seats, at the head table where Katie and Marcus were already seated, laughing with their wedding party. None of them glanced in my direction. None of them would even be able to see me behind the column. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The hurt was so profound it transcended tears. Instead, a strange calm descended. I smiled at Sophia, thanked her for her help, and walked steadily toward the exit, my head held high. As I passed the reception desk, the venue manager recognized me. Miss Campbell, is everything all right? Everything is fine, I replied with a serenity I didn't feel. The venue is beautiful. You've done a wonderful job. He beamed with pride. Thank you. Oh, I meant to catch you earlier. We still need to process the final payment for the reception. The deposit covered the ceremony, but the remaining balance for food, service, and the open bar is due today. Will you be handling that now, or should I speak with someone else? In that moment, I realized I still held one card. The final venue payment, approximately $22,000, had not been processed. The deposit I'd paid covered the ceremony, but not the reception currently getting underway. My mind raced. What would Diana want me to do? What did I owe Katie after this deliberate humiliation? What would be the consequences of the action I was contemplating? I looked the manager in the eye. I think there's been a miscommunication. The bride and groom were supposed to arrange the final payment. You should speak with them directly. Oh, he said, clearly confused. Our contract has your name on it. Nevertheless, I replied firmly, I will not be making any additional payments today. Good evening. As I walked to my car, my phone began to ring. I didn't need to check to know who it was. The venue manager, no doubt, was already alerting the wedding party to the payment issue. But I couldn't bring myself to answer. Instead, I drove home in silence, my mind replaying years of memories with Katie, trying to pinpoint where things had gone so wrong. The drive home passed in a blur. Streets I'd traveled hundreds of times seemed foreign, the familiar route made strange by the turmoil in my mind. My house, when I finally pulled into the driveway, looked like it belonged to someone else. Someone whose heart wasn't currently shattering into pieces. I sat in my parked car for nearly 20 minutes, hands still gripping the steering wheel, unable to summon the energy to move. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across my garden. The garden where Katie had once helped me plant tulip bulbs, her small hands patting down the soil with determined concentration. Will they grow by tomorrow, Aunt Eleanor? 6-year-old Katie had asked.
No, sweetheart, I'd explain it.
They need time and care. The best things in life can't be rushed. The memory brought fresh pain. 18 years of love, support, and guidance. Had it meant nothing in the end? How could Katie place me behind that column, knowing I'd be unable to witness a single moment of her reception? The calculated nature of the insult was what hurt the most. This wasn't an oversight. It was a deliberate choice. Eventually, I made my way inside. The house was quiet, empty in a way it had never felt before. I kicked off my shoes, still in my silk dress, and sank onto the couch. My phone, which I'd silenced during the drive, showed 15 missed calls and a growing number of text messages. The first voicemail was from the venue manager, his professional tone strained. Ms. Campbell, there seems to be a misunderstanding about the payment for tonight's reception. Please call me back immediately. The second was from Katie, breathless and panicked. Aunt Eleanor? The venue says you left without paying the balance. There must be some mistake. Call me back, please. The third was from Marcus, his usual smooth confidence replaced by barely controlled anger. Eleanor, what the hell do you think you're doing? You agreed to pay for this venue. If this is some kind of game, it's not funny. Call us back now. Each subsequent message grew more desperate or angry, depending on who was calling. Patricia's cold fury. George's legal threats. Katie's progression from confusion to pleading to indignation. As I listened, a strange sense of clarity began to emerge through my pain. For years, I had allowed my love for Katie to blind me to the increasing imbalance in our relationship. I had given and given, asking for nothing in return except to be included, to be respected, to be acknowledged as an important part of her life. And in response, I had been gradually marginalized, my role diminished until finally, I was physically hidden away behind a column. My phone rang again. The venue manager. This time I answered. Hello, Roger. Miss Campbell. He began, relief evident in his voice. I'm glad I reached you. We have a situation here. The reception is underway, but without payment, I'm afraid we'll have to. I understand this puts you in a difficult position, I interrupted calmly, but I will not be providing payment for the reception. But the contract. The contract stipulated payment for services rendered. I paid the deposit for the ceremony, which occurred as planned. However, I was excluded from meaningful participation in the reception through deliberate seating arrangements that placed me behind a column, unable to see or be seen. Under these circumstances, I do not feel obligated to pay for an event from which I was effectively barred. There was a long pause. I wasn't aware of this situation. But Miss Campbell, there are over 200 guests here. The food has been served, the bar is open. I suggest you speak with the bride and groom about alternative payment arrangements, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. This is between them and me now. After ending the call, I turned off my phone completely. The silence that followed was both deafening and necessary. I needed space to think, to process, to decide what came next. I poured myself a glass of wine and moved to the porch swing. Another spot filled with memories of Katie. How many summer evenings had we spent here? Talking about her day at school, her dreams, her fears. I had listened to her first heartbreak on this swing, had celebrated her college acceptance, had helped her work through career decisions. As the night deepened around me, I reflected on everything I'd done for Katie over the years. The bedtime stories when she couldn't sleep. The hours spent helping with science projects. The driving lessons in empty parking lots. The countless small sacrifices and large financial contributions. All given freely out of love, never expecting repayment. Only respect and inclusion. The decision to cancel the payment hadn't been premeditated. It had been born in that moment of crushing realization that I'd been deliberately hidden away. Was it the right decision? I wasn't sure. But for perhaps the first time in our relationship, I had prioritized my own dignity over Katie's desires. Eventually, exhaustion overcame me, and I went to bed, though sleep remained elusive. The first light of dawn was filtering through my curtains when I finally drifted off, emotionally drained but oddly at peace with my decision. When I awoke hours later and turned on my phone, it immediately began buzzing with notifications. 37 missed calls. 63 text messages. 5 emails. The digital manifestation of chaos I had caused. I scrolled through some of the texts, the tone ranging from Katie's initial confusion to Marcus's threats of legal action for breach of contract and willful sabotage. Patricia had sent a particularly vitriolic message about my classless behavior and how I had shown my true colors. But it was Katie's final message, sent at 3:18 a.m., that gave me pause. I don't understand how you could humiliate me like this. After everything we've been through together, I thought you loved me. I guess I was wrong. The irony was almost too much to bear. She saw my action as a betrayal, with no recognition of how her treatment of me had precipitated it. In her mind, I was the villain of this story. Perhaps we both were. Or perhaps neither of us was. Just two people with different expectations, different perspectives, and now, it seemed, a badly damaged relationship. 2 days after the wedding, I was in my garden deadheading roses, finding therapeutic value in the simple act of pruning what was spent to encourage new growth, when a car screeched into my driveway. The slam of car doors was followed by angry footsteps on my walkway. I straightened up, garden shears still in hand, as Katie and Marcus rounded the corner of the house. Katie's face was blotchy from crying, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, a stark contrast to her perfectly coiffed wedding appearance. Marcus looked equally disheveled, his normally confident demeanor replaced by barely contained rage. How could you? Katie demanded without preamble, her voice breaking. Do you have any idea what you've done? I set down my garden shears and removed my gloves deliberately, taking time to compose my thoughts. Why don't we go inside and talk? Don't act all calm and reasonable now, Marcus snapped. You deliberately sabotaged our wedding. Do you know how humiliating it was to tell our guests the venue was threatening to shut down the reception? My parents had to put the remaining balance on their credit cards. I'm sorry you were embarrassed, I replied, keeping my voice level. Please, let's discuss this inside. Not in front of the neighbors. Reluctantly, they followed me into the house. In my living room, Katie immediately began pacing while Marcus stood rigid, arms crossed defensively across his chest. The venue is threatening legal action, he said. They might sue both you and us for the chaos you caused. I've already spoken with my attorney, I replied, which wasn't true. But I needed to establish that I wasn't intimidated. The contract was between me and the venue, not you. Any legal issues are for me to handle. Why, Aunt Eleanor? Katie asked, tears streaming down her face. Why would you do this to me on my wedding day? The genuine confusion in her voice nearly broke my resolve. Did she truly not understand? Katie, I said gently. Where was I seated at your reception? She blinked, thrown by the apparent non sequitur. What? What does that have to do with anything? Please just answer the question. Where was I seated? I don't know, table 19 or something. The seating chart was finalized weeks ago. Table 19, I confirmed. Directly behind a massive stone column that completely blocked my view of everything. The head table, the dance floor, the cake cutting, the speeches. I couldn't see a single moment of your reception, Katie. And no one could see me. Katie's expression shifted. A flicker of guilt quickly replaced by defensiveness. The venue has structural limitations. Not every table can have a perfect view. There were 18 other tables, all with clear sight lines, I pointed out. And I was seated with your father's second cousins whom I've met twice in my life, and an old college friend of Marcus's parents who didn't know a single person at the wedding. Marcus interjected. The seating arrangements were complicated. We had to consider a lot of factors. Like making sure I was hidden away? I asked directly. Be honest, Katie. Was my table placement an oversight or a deliberate choice? The silence that followed was answer enough. Katie looked away, unable to meet my eyes. I want to show you something, I said, retrieving my phone. I pulled up a photo I'd taken at the reception before leaving. A clear image of table 19 and its position behind the column. I handed the phone to Katie. She glanced at it briefly before passing it to Marcus. It's not as bad as you're making it out to be. Katie, I said, my voice finally breaking. I helped raise you after your mother died. I've supported you emotionally and financially for 20 years. I paid $38,000 for your wedding, and you placed me where I couldn't see or participate in any meaningful way. Can you understand why that hurt me deeply? Marcus snorted. So this was revenge? You ruined our wedding because you didn't like your table. I didn't ruin your wedding, I corrected him. The ceremony went perfectly. The reception venue was paid for. The issue was the additional reception costs, which came due after I discovered my deliberate exclusion. Katie had grown quiet, her earlier anger seemingly deflated. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she whispered. What wasn't? She looked up, tears streaming down her face. Any of it. The wedding planning. The way my relationship with you changed. The table placement. Then explain it to me, Katie. Help me understand how we got here. She sank onto my couch, suddenly looking very young and vulnerable. Marcus's parents. They have expectations. About the wedding. About who I should be. About the kind of family we should present to their friends. And I didn't fit into that picture, I concluded softly. Katie's silence was confirmation. They thought you were too common, she finally admitted in a small voice. They said your clothes were off-brand, your manners too casual. They were worried you'd say something inappropriate in front of their friends. Patricia said having you prominently placed would make the wedding look less sophisticated. Each word was a knife to my heart, but I remained outwardly calm. And what did you say when they told you this? I tried to defend you at first, Katie said, not meeting my eyes. But they were so insistent. And Marcus agreed with them. He said first impressions with his parents' social circle were important for his career. I just wanted everyone to be happy. Everyone except me, I noted. You weren't supposed to notice the column. Katie suddenly burst out. You were supposed to just be happy to be invited, to be part of my special day at all. The room fell silent. The truth, finally spoken aloud, hung between us like a physical presence. Marcus, who had been watching our exchange with growing impatience, stepped forward. This is all very touching, but it doesn't change the fact that you violated a contract and humiliated us in front of everyone we know. My father has already consulted our family attorney. We can sue you for breach of contract and emotional distress. I turned to him, seeing clearly for the first time the man Katie had chosen. You're welcome to try, Marcus. But consider how it will look when I explain in court why I left, with photographic evidence of my deliberate exclusion after contributing $38,000. Consider the public nature of legal proceedings, how the story will spread through your parents' precious social circle. His face paled slightly. Are you threatening me? I'm suggesting we find a more private resolution, I replied evenly. One that doesn't involve airing our family's dirty laundry in court. Katie stood up suddenly. This isn't about money. This is about what you did. You deliberately sabotaged the most important day of my life because your feelings were hurt. And you deliberately excluded the woman who helped raise you because I wasn't polished enough for your new family, I countered. We both made choices, Katie. Choices that have consequences. Marcus grabbed Katie's arm. This is getting us nowhere. Eleanor clearly isn't going to take responsibility for her actions. We should go. Actually, I'm taking responsibility right now, I said. I'm acknowledging that I made a decision in a moment of deep hurt that had significant consequences. But I'm also holding you both accountable for the choices that led to that moment. Katie really looked at me for what felt like the first time in months. I never meant to hurt you, she said quietly. I believe you, I replied. But you did hurt me, Katie. Deeply. And I don't know where we go from here. Marcus tugged at Katie's arm. We're leaving. My father's attorney will be in touch. Katie hesitated, torn between her husband and the aunt who had been her surrogate mother for most of her life. You should go with your husband, I told her gently. But know that despite everything, I still love you, Katie. That hasn't changed. For a moment, I thought she might break away from Marcus, might step toward me instead. But the moment passed. She allowed him to lead her toward the door. This isn't over. Marcus threw over his shoulder as they left. But in many ways, it was. Something fundamental had broken between Katie and me that day. Whether it could ever be repaired remained to be seen. After they left, I sat alone in my living room, the house quieter than it had ever been. The confrontation had brought clarity, if not closure. I now understood the choices Katie had made, even if they continued to hurt. And I stood by my own choice, not out of vindictiveness, but out of a newfound commitment to my own dignity and self-respect. The weeks following the confrontation with Katie and Marcus passed in a strange limbo. The threatened legal action never materialized. I suspect the Mitchells realized a public legal battle would only bring unwanted attention to their son's wedding fiasco. Instead, a tense silence descended, broken only by occasional updates from mutual acquaintances who felt caught in the middle. I learned that Katie and Marcus had shortened their honeymoon, returning after just 3 days instead of the planned 2 weeks. Apparently, the financial strain of unexpectedly covering the reception costs had forced them to adjust their plans. This knowledge brought me no satisfaction, only a lingering sadness for how things had unfolded. My sister Joan, Diana's older sister who lived in Florida, called after hearing about the wedding drama through family channels. Diana would have been heartbroken to see this rift between you and Katie, she said bluntly. But she also wouldn't have let Katie treat you that way. I keep wondering if I overreacted, I admitted. If I should have just accepted my placement and paid for everything anyway. Eleanor, Joan said firmly, you've spent 20 years putting Katie first. Maybe it was time you stood up for yourself. Diana would understand that. Her words brought unexpected comfort. I had been so focused on what Diana would think about the broken relationship with Katie that I hadn't considered she might actually support my decision to finally draw a boundary. About a month after the wedding, a formal-looking envelope arrived in my mail. My heart raced, assuming it was the legal notice Marcus had threatened. Instead, it contained a brief letter from Patricia and George Mitchell, stating they had resolved the outstanding financial matters with the venue and considered the matter closed. The letter was coldly polite, making no mention of Katie or our family relationship, effectively drawing a line under the whole affair. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of their role in the situation, but I hadn't expected one. The Mitchells had protected their social standing and their son's marriage. In their world, that was what mattered most. Katie's silence was harder to bear. The niece who had once called me almost daily now seemed to have vanished from my life. I resisted the urge to reach out, believing she needed space to process everything and make her own decisions about our relationship going forward. Instead of dwelling on what I couldn't control, I focused on healing. The $22,000 I had withheld from the wedding reception payment remained in my account, a sum I wasn't sure what to do with. It felt tainted somehow, a reminder of broken trust and relationships. After much consideration, I decided to use part of it for something I had long postponed. A trip to Italy, a country Diana and I had always dreamed of visiting together. I booked a 3-week tour for the fall, something I would never have done while putting Katie's needs first. The decision felt both terrifying and liberating, a declaration of independence at 68 years old. 6 months passed. I returned from Italy with a renewed spirit, hundreds of photographs, and a perspective I hadn't expected to gain. Standing among ruins that had witnessed thousands of years of human drama, my own troubles had seemed smaller, more manageable. Family rifts had existed since families began. Some healed, some didn't. The world continued either way. It was a Tuesday morning in November when my doorbell rang unexpectedly. When I opened it, Katie stood on my porch, thinner than I remembered, dark circles under her eyes. She held a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. "Hi, Aunt Eleanor," she said softly. "Can I come in?" We sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd taught her to bake cookies and helped with science projects. The silence between us felt enormous. "Marcus and I are separated," she finally said, staring into the cup of tea I'd placed before her. "It's been about a month now." I said nothing, waiting for her to continue. After the wedding, things changed. Or maybe they were always that way and I finally started seeing clearly. She looked up, meeting my eyes. He controlled everything, our finances, our social life, what I wore, who I spoke to. His parents were always there, always judging. I felt like I was disappearing. My heart ached for her, but I maintained my silence. "I kept thinking about what you said that day," she continued. "About choices and consequences. About standing up for yourself." She pushed the small package toward me. "I found this while I was packing my things." I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was the velvet box containing my mother's sapphire earrings. The ones I'd offered Katie on her wedding day. "Patricia took them," Katie explained, tears forming. "She said they didn't match her vision for the wedding. I never even got to see them until later when I found them in a drawer. I should have stood up to her then. I should have stood up for you." The earrings glinted in the morning light, a tangible link to generations of women in our family. My mother, Diana, myself, and Katie. "I'm so sorry, Aunt Eleanor," Katie whispered. "For the table, for not defending you, for everything. I got so caught up in trying to be what the Mitchells wanted that I forgot who I was. Who raised me. What actually matters." I reached across the table and took her hand. "We both made mistakes, Katie. Can you ever forgive me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I already have," I told her truthfully. "But rebuilding trust takes time." She nodded, understanding this wasn't an immediate fix, but the beginning of a healing process. "I'd like to try if you're willing." That conversation marked the start of a new chapter in our relationship. Katie moved into a small apartment and began therapy, working to rediscover the confident, independent woman she had been before Marcus. I maintained my boundaries, offering emotional support, but being more mindful about financial assistance. We began a tradition of Sunday dinners, slowly rebuilding our connection on more equal footing. A year after the wedding debacle, Katie and I sat on my porch swing, watching the sunset just like we used to. She had filed for divorce, returned to her architectural firm, and was gradually finding her way back to herself. "I still can't believe you canceled the reception payment," she said with a small laugh. The look on Marcus's face when the venue manager pulled him aside. "Not my proudest moment," I admitted, "but perhaps a necessary one." Katie leaned her head against my shoulder, a gesture so familiar it brought tears to my eyes. "You taught me something important that day, Aunt Eleanor. You taught me that love without respect isn't really love at all, and that it's never too late to stand up for yourself." As we sat there, I reflected on how sometimes the most painful ruptures create space for something healthier to grow. Katie and I would never return to the idealized aunt-niece relationship of her childhood. Too much had happened, but we were building something new. A relationship between equals, built on mutual respect and genuine understanding. Life rarely gives us perfect endings. Relationships are messy, complicated by the baggage we all carry and the imperfect choices we make. But they're also resilient, capable of transforming and deepening through conflict when both parties are willing to do the hard work of honest reconciliation. Has someone ever placed you behind a column in your life? Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between keeping the peace and standing up for your own dignity? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more reflections on family, boundaries, and the courage it takes to honor yourself even when it's difficult. Thank you for listening, and remember, it's never too late to insist on a seat at the table where you can fully participate in your own life.